Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to CO Moed about It Was Her New York. Welcome, CO.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I'm really glad to be here.
I am so excited about this. I said to CO before we started recording, you know, when you write a personal journal, it is just that, it's personal. Sometimes when I read a person's journal, I never know whether it's going to inspire me, if it's going to be something I love. This was just so heartfelt and so wonderful. And it's about some memory issues. It's about a lot of memory issues, which we will unpack as we go on. But I've asked CO if she'd be kind enough to read page 168.
My pleasure. Epilogue. In lieu of flowers. Tell the truth. Tell yourself the truth. Don't let the bullshit you believe compromise either of the above. Don't lie. Unless you're drunk, then really don't lie. Don't steal. Accept hand-me-downs. Look fabulous in your own clothes. They may have started out as hand-me-downs, but they're yours now. Proudly recount their lineage. Never feel ashamed of that. Never take a taxi. Walk everywhere. Don't wear a coat in winter. Carry your own weight to the point of pathology. Better to be independent than not. Refuse to lose at the hands of cowardliness, mediocrity, stupidity, and the need to blend in. Suffer aloneness at the risk of fitting in, and any of the above. Refuse to feel fear. If you do, ignore it and keep going, just like Florence did that night during World War II blackout under the Manhattan Bridge by the movie theater, now a Chinese market. Always put your work first. Always do your work. Always put your work first. Always do your work. Rage against the machine, even when it's related to you. Risk being laughed at by morons when you do something no one else is doing, just like when Florence put on those roller skates in 1972 and skated up and down Grand Street, and all those people laughed at her. And then a couple of years later, everybody had roller skates. Start your entire life over at 58 like you're a 14-year-old because, you know, on some level, you still are. Fight back, just like Florence did all the time someone mugged her or tried to mug her during the 1970s. Don't ever quit. Know that beer, that sandwich, those shoes, that jacket, those pants, that avenue, that movie house, that proper grammar, that etude, that sonata, that scale, that subway, that bus, that street, that bar, that woman, that dance, that hot dog, that boardwalk, that beach, that ocean is your New York. It was hers.
CO is just amazing. I think this will give the audience a perfect opening to exactly what this book is about. So this book is about how your mom slipped into dementia, her life before, the people before, your experience with her, and what you were left with. So give the audience a little bit more maybe of an overview than I just did. I'm trying not to overtalk it because I just love this so much. That was so heartfelt and so many life lessons that are perfection, if you may even call something perfection.
Thank you so much. That was what we read at the end of her memorial service, and everyone got a copy of that. And that really was her epilogue. Florence began to ever so slightly fade at the same time that New York City was ever so slightly disappearing into gentrification and into a city that wasn't welcoming the people that made New York, New York. And it was a very slow process. You know how they talk about how frogs are cooked and the water gets warmer and warmer and they sort of don't know they're being, it was that feeling. Things got more and more faded and then they began to sort of slip away. And then streets were suddenly totally different, or a store disappeared, neighborhoods disappeared. And Florence's moments of being herself began to disappear. This is a highly independent woman who reclaimed her life and was living it on her own terms. When that began to happen, my own sense of homelessness and loss began to build. And one day, I've told this story several times, one day, walking home from taking care of her, I saw a young man wearing a pork pie hat, facing a very expensive video camera, talking about what an egg cream was. And, what's an egg cream? Is there an egg in it? And egg cream is a New York City drink that is so much part of our city's culture and history. And it's what if New York was a drink, it'd be an egg cream. I just got pissed. And being someone that has decided not to punch people on the street, I went home and I felt like no one's going to tell the story of my city, the way I know it. It doesn't mean that people can't tell the story of New York, but no one can tell my story of my city and my streets in this weird, unique way that I lived or grew up in or was raised in or have friends in or survived in. And I did it. I started doing 3 stories a week that I would put up on the old-fashioned blogs. And I took pictures because I wanted, who wants to read words if you don't see a picture? I like pictures. So I was taking pictures and just throwing them up. And at some point, a couple of years after Florence died, I had a book. I had 1,400 stories to pull out and create a story of New York in its essence. Not just Florence, but New York, because because we used to joke, New York was a mother. New York is a mother, and New York is a mother.
It's both.
And Florence was a mother, and she was also New York, and she was an artist. And New York was created as a place where art could flourish, where we brought forth creation and creativity and expression that was needed in the world. And these days, and you need rent to do that. You need jobs to do that. You need the American dream door open to do that. And these days, those doors are shut. The housing crisis is insane here. And, my mother grew up here and we had affordable housing. I have affordable housing. So there was this determination to not just tell the story of dementia, which sucks, but it was also to talk about what New York was. And in all of this, there was the story of her hidden love affair with another woman that was 60 years of loss and love and desire and yearning and reconciliation and disaster and coming out. And that's also there's a unique heart in this Her New York, which is about being gay, being LGBTQ, about being queer, about being defined as whatever you want to define yourself. But that was also a part of her story, where she didn't get to step into a city as who she was until she was 58 years old. And
it is, and it's wonderful. And I thought about, so years ago I worked with a woman who had been married and she had 2 children. And then later in life, I believe she was probably in her late 30s or early 40s. She realized she was a lesbian. And for a while, she had a partner who also had 2 children. So they each had 2 children. And I remember there was a time where they were not out to their children.
Oh, yeah.
So can you give the audience maybe a little example or an idea of what it was like with you and your mom? I mean, was there a coming out party? Was it something that you knew about? Because I think there's some things we know instinctively, but we may not have the words for it. So what was that experience like?
We knew that there was a woman with a name whose picture was, you remember the little photo booth pictures? There's always a strip of photos, on my mother's bureau. And we would ask her who that woman was by name. I can't say her name because she never told her family.
Yeah, that was something that was sad to me because here's someone who's lived 80 some years, and it's something that she's had to keep with herself. Maybe it's her nugget of a gold egg of a secret for her. But what I do know is that if you don't share that golden nugget, you're cheating not only yourself, but you're cheating your loved ones.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you're having to almost kill a little piece of you
I think you
because
kill a lot of you. I think
I do too. I try not to over
yeah.
dramatize it, but I do think so. I think you kill a lot of it. I mean, how can, I have blue eyes. If I wore brown contacts all of my life, I would be cheating people I don't know, and I have blue eyes. I mean, it's something that's oversimplification, but at the same time, you want people to know who you really are, because otherwise, that's one of the things about that epilogue that spoke so directly to me. Be who you are and don't lie.
Don't lie.
Because when you do lie, you cheat yourself. And there's no way around that.
Yeah. I felt, I knew that there was unhappiness in my parents' marriage, but I didn't, things were very, I mean, if they were in the closet, they were so deep into the closet, that, there were corners you didn't even see when you opened the door. But when I moved into my own apartment, I was 17 or so. That meant that the household that I grew up in, there was a bedroom that my mother moved into and a woman moved in with her. And I was like, I didn't care. I mean, I had enough of a variety of people in my life that like, I don't care. I think when I began to explore my own wide variety of curiosities and interests and attractions, that it was I who brought my mom into certain gay community organizations for senior citizens, because I was interested in dating the social worker.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
She's actually still to this day a good friend of mine, and one of her portraits of me is on my website. You open up the website, there is this portrait that she took of me in 1988. Morgan Gwenwald is a incredible lesbian photographer. She has broken ground in so many genres. She's finally coming into recognition. I'm so proud to be one of her subjects, even if it was in 1988.
I'm fortunate enough to I have some friends that one of them was just telling me earlier he found a painting he did of me several years ago that had been in storage, and so he was just taking it out. And I'm like, you know what? It's a piece of my life. It's also a piece of his life. It's a shared thing. That's one of the things that I love about the photographs in the book. Some are crystal clear, some are a little blurry. But I love it because I felt like it was a complete snapshot of life. When you sit for a portrait, if it's a photograph or even a painting, you have to sit still so they capture what the artist wants to capture.
Right.
When you capture a moment in time, you capture a moment in time. And so I just loved that because I felt like I saw those moments in time, and I love the fact that smartphones have cameras. I remember having to tote around an old Kodachrome, all these things. I had one that had a little disc in it. I had all these things that, we've progressed to a great place now. So yes, a lot of us take a picture of food or a cocktail or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, this really doesn't mean anything. However, occasionally I look back and I say, well, damn, that was a really great shot of a piece of meat, whatever it was,
Well, I have to talk about the photographs because until recent, most of these photographs were taken before smartphones. So I was carrying around a small point and shoot camera. The archival stuff, clearly they're scanned or they're photographs that I took of photographs.
Sure.
Or there's one thing with the girls next door where, these childhood friends of mine, have archival photographs that people threw out because people die and there's no family to take care of the belongings. So a lot of these photographs literally were taken on the fly. Like for instance, on the BMT where there's a picture of a woman's wallet sticking out of her pocket, I was doing it, sort of under undercover. I was just doing it as fast as I could so she wouldn't see me. I'd already pissed her off by saying something. And I wanted to get a picture of the wallet because I was going to write a story. I knew I was going to write a story. So a lot of these photographs were taken, way before the smartphone. And it really is like just snapshots. It really was. Very few of them were set up or posed or constructed. They were what was happening at that moment. And I was very sure with myself about not wanting to document Florence's illness. I know that there's a whole genre and there are many beautiful films and books of that. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to document the life, her aliveness, and the life around us. So a lot of the time I'd be doing one thing with one hand and snapping with the other and getting what I got. And that was sort of the surreptitious and sort of transient feeling of life slipping by.
And I appreciate that because I've seen both. I've seen the devastation of Alzheimer and dementia. My mom's mom had dementia. According to my dad's death certificate, that was the number one cause of his death. Mm-hmm. And my stepmother says to me, "Oh, well, yeah." And I'm like, "Oh, well, yeah. Didn't somebody think they should tell me?" Because I might have actually had a little bit of a different angle. So one of the things, and I do want to talk about that. So one of the things I used to do when I live in Los Angeles and I would go home to North Carolina, and I used to put my dad in the truck. It was his truck, and I would ride somewhere. My dad traveled throughout his life. Mm-hmm. And so we would go within 2 hours of where he lived, and we would just go see neighborhoods and cities that he hadn't seen in years, and we would talk about it. I was so blessed to have that amount of time. But then towards the end of his life, he began to want to go less and less. And so when I saw that happening with Florence, she didn't want to go somewhere. And I understood that. But so maybe talk a little bit about Coney Island and why she liked Coney Island so much and your last trip to Coney Island with Florence.
Well, before any of this all happened, I got her to sit down and I did little vignettes of photographs and oral history of Coney Island. She was going to Coney Island way back when she was a teenager. And I think there was naked dance, I think she called it naked swimming in the middle of the night. They skinny deep at Coney Island. I am not sure. I can only kind of guess that she probably went with her ex-lover, the woman that she loved. But she was always going to Coney Island, and for poor people, that was our Riviera, and for middle class people, that was a Riviera. For anyone who didn't have money to do something fancy, that's where you went. She was very committed to going there in her later years, and I would always know where to find her if I went to Coney. I always knew that she had this one spot on the beach. And I remember taking a girl I was dating. I said, "Come to Coney Island with me. I'll introduce you to my mother." We got off the train. We walked straight in front of the aquarium. There was Florence. Like, this is the girl I'm dating. This is my mother, and we wandered off. Unfortunately, the last time that I went to Coney with her was when she was dead. It was.
Oh. All right. Well, you took her back to a place she loved. I loved that.
I didn't put this in the book because it just wasn't part of the process and the flow. But if there's ever a second edition, I might. But we took her ashes to Coney Island, and it was. I had my camera. It was a cold day. The wind was blowing, and people sensed what we were doing. It's totally against the law, and I might have people come to my door to arrest me. But the wind kept blowing the ashes back on me, and so at some point we asked a stranger to take a picture of my sister and me, and we're just kind of covered in Florence with my camera and the cam. So even that was this wonderful kind of like ironic moment of Florence at Coney Island, but prior to that, in the many years before, I would actually go with her to Coney Island on a trip, but not very often. We had a relationship that was more, I would say, food based. So that, you know, if she came over, we would go to a diner and have a meal together.
Okay.
Or I would go back to her home and fix things with duct tape. So that was where we connected. My sister, however, and again, not included in the book because it was so prior to everything. My sister took her to Coney Island on her birthday so that she could swim in, like a polar bear. So she swam in Coney Island as like a polar bear in November of, I think, 1984, but I'm not sure. Wow. I haven't realized. So, but it was her relationship to Coney. And these days, my relationship to Coney is that there's a minor league baseball team there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, for the Mets have the Cyclones there. And so my schedule is so kind of packed that every once in a while we can sneak out and get a baseball game in. So that's when I get back to Coney. Yeah.
My loving experience with Coney is that's probably where I got COVID in March of 2020. I was insistent. So every time I go to New York, which is once or twice a year, I pick one neighborhood I've never been in. I've been to Fells Point. I've been to the Bronx. I went out to Coney Island, and I came back to Los Angeles and had COVID. So I said, my friends are like, Dan, we're never going to Coney with you again. You tried to kill us.
You were out in the sea, water, air. There's no way.
Absolutely. But I did have a good time, and it was in March, so it was cold as all get outs. Yeah. And most everything was closed, but that doesn't bother me because I'm just going for the experience. Yeah. I'd rather see the locals than see the tourist anyway. Yeah. So
no, Coney Island is a really it's a part of my childhood DNA, and it's changed a lot, but the fairway is still the same. And I actually, the Wonder Wheel was like one of the few rides that we didn't have a lot of money, and it was, very tight. So we didn't go on rides, but we went on the Wonder Wheel every once in a while. I had to wait until Morgan took me on the Cyclone as an adult. Never been on the Cyclone, which is the famous, Cyclone.
It's a nice roller coaster, but it's wooden, and I don't like wooden roller coasters. Yeah. So they beat you to death. You need to be young to ride a
yes, it certainly wasn't. I'm never going on it again. But I think with the Wonder Wheel, that's a family-owned business. And I went to school with actually one of the grandsons of the people who had established. I mean, like, this is a very New York spot. And, but there was this feeling, this sort of proprietary kind of insular experience of Coney, because it's where my family went, and we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't participate in sort of the events around it. So it's this very unique place that is almost like someone called it my mama lotion, which in Yiddish means my mother tongue. It's my mama lotion.
And I love that. There are so many things in this book that you do see the evolution of New York City. There's a place where we'll talk about your physicality, where you go to get a training bra, and there are all these places that you can get one. And I have to tell you, I was a little, I will say that you must be your mother's daughter, because there's an experience that you describe on the way one of them sized up which size you needed. And then you talk about, outside of camp counselors and somebody's uncle. Yeah. I was like, holy cow, that's a whole different story that you glossed over. But I was like, we have these experiences in life that stay with us. Mm-hmm. And we have the opportunity, and I'm certainly not diminishing anything, we have an opportunity as we grow older to look back on some experiences and choose which way we want to look at it. Mm-hmm. Pardon my language, but shit happens, and you can eat that bitterness forever, or you can say this was just what happened and it was the way of the world. But I will say I did not miss that. I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, my heartstrings tugged for you.
Well, when I say normal, it was such, those were the days where marital rape didn't exist. And if you got raped, it's because you did something. And there was no such thing as incest, and there was no such thing as child molestation. There just wasn't. Of course there was, but there was no language for it. So there really was this kind of bewildering thing of, oh, you know, and it was such a fabric of our neighborhood. I'm in touch with 3 of my childhood friends, and we talk about this. It's, you know, about the violence and the assaults and the sexual, you know, fear that we walked around with, just being girls or being young women. So it really was that moment of, oh, you know, just that's kind of an odd moment. All right. You know, an odd moment of something that is also not unfamiliar. And that really is a snapshot of those days, because if that were to happen today, and when it does, it's a completely different experience. There's a much more of a, I mean, there's a legal system now that supports action, but in those days, it didn't happen. There was nothing wrong with that.
No, I mean, it was just, as you say, part of the fabric of everyday life.
Yeah.
And then, so in some ways, New York has changed for the better, as all of society has. But then there are also something that I don't remember the name of that little merry-go-ride that children used to ride on. That had a handle, and you would run in a circle with it and then ride on it. And of course, those are completely extinct because everybody's going to die. I didn't die on it. You didn't die on it, but you didn't die on the seesaw. You might've got 2 black eyes, but you didn't die on the seesaw. But it is funny. We say we'd like kids to be off of video games and off their phone and out doing things, and yet we take away everything but the swing. I love a swing even at my age, but you need more than just a swing on a playground. So It's like, you know, and you gonna get banged up eventually as a child. It just happens.
Yeah. I had fun on this. I mean, I fell off the swings. I on the monkey bars. I got black eyes from the seesaws. You know, it's like, it was fun for me. I think, you know, there's so many ways that we can interact with the world around us as children. And I feel mixed about the fact that as children, we were sent out onto the street. And I feel thrilled that as children, we were sent out onto the street. There was less drugs. And so it made a lot of the violence a little bit easier. When crack came in, you know, I was an adult when crack came in, and it was one of the rare times in my life I felt fear on the street.
Yes. Yeah, life changed. Life changed.
Yeah. So I get like sort of how things, you know, evolve. And I don't know, since I don't have children, you know, I don't know the ins and outs of why kids aren't playing on the street, but I do know in certain neighborhoods, kids are out on the street playing, and a whole lot of neighborhoods, kids aren't, or they're in a playground under heavy supervision. Yeah, I guess whatever keeps you safe and makes you alive and makes you happy. All right. You know, I avoid the, you know, in my day it was, because I don't know if that really could have been better or worse. And I'm kind of, you know, I did okay, but I have friends who are not doing okay or have died, you know, because of the trauma that they received. And, you know, I don't know if things should have been different or not been different. It just, it was what it was. And I'm glad that I and my 3 friends survived.
I love
that we have good lives and we take care of each other still. That was the other thing. We had a very close, you know, we had a lot of little girls taking care of each other. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is. And I think I grew up in a very, very small town, about 400 people. And but if you think about the little neighborhood pocket you lived in on the Lower East Side, you had a very little neighborhood as well. Yeah. And so, I mean, my best friend I've had since I was, you know, a year or 2 old, she and I still talk. I mean, we're very fortunate that we still have each other, and it's communities where we find it and where we make it.
Right. It's absolutely true that the buildings that I grew up in, the sort of the building sections that I grew up in, was a little village, and, you know, it wasn't fun. People were very judgmental of one another. And then I would go to a public school, and that was a village. And then I'd go to my friends' houses and other housing things, and that was a village. And so you're right, we had a ton of little villages. There was also the subways, and so you didn't know when to be on the subways. You know, it was like, I mean, there's a sense like we were not in a village, but it's a small world. It's a different world. world. New York is a tiny, tiny world. And I'll tell you a story. I got in 2008, I landed a freelance gig at the UN just for a couple of months as a writer. And I didn't know any of these people. I was really a fish out of water. I was like, what the fuck did I get myself into? And I was sitting next to this woman, and she said, very kind of quietly, said, "Oh, so, where you come from?" I said, "I'm a New Yorker." She goes, "Oh, I'm a New Yorker." I said, "Oh, yeah." And then the question that every New Yorker asks, every New Yorker is, I said, "What high school you go to?"
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I went to Hunter High." I went, "Oh, my sister went to Hunter High." She goes, "What's your sister's name?" "Louise Moed." "Oh, your mother was my first piano teacher."
Yes. And it's like you think you living in New York, I live in Los Angeles. You think, oh, you'll never run into people that you know, but the universe has a way of bringing people together when we need to be brought together. And I find for me, I'm like, oh, look at this little blessing that has popped up, because I think for me in my life, it has always been a reason when I meet someone or run into someone, especially someone with a connection to someone I already know.
Yeah.
Because I went out to dinner a few weeks ago and I sat next to a woman and a man, and I'm a talker. So I struck up a conversation. We have a couple of mutual friends together. Had no idea she was a writer. I interviewed her a few weeks ago. It was just, but it was a Tuesday night. You don't really think you're going to meet somebody on Tuesday night. And her book was so wonderful. And I've shared it with a lot of friends and people, because I'm like, this is just, it was fortuitous. It was meant to happen.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love moments like that.
Me too. I live for them. So an odd question, which I love asking odd questions. So your mom loves Sister Act and Singing in the Rain. Besides the musicality, do you have is there anything that has come to you why those two movies? Because I found it unusual, because I do find that as people slip into dementia, there are certain things they will cling on to.
Yes,
obsessively.
I wonder if we had VHSs of Ginger and Roger movies, if she would have had the same response. I don't know. She was a young girl, I think, when Singing in the Rain came out, and it was such the romantic fairy tale of those days. And who doesn't love Gene Kelly? I mean, come on. So I mean, and she actually started tap dancing lessons when she was in her 60s, and not bad. So this was clearly something that resonated with her about her childhood. It's set in a time when she was a child. It's this beautiful, rich movie. There's Gene Kelly, who's hunky, and it's funny as hell.
Debbie Reynolds, who's funny.
Right. Absolutely. Donald Connor. I think she just connected to it, and we had the VHSs of it. So I think it was also about what we had at hand, but she just wanted to see it all the time. And Sister Act, again, we're talking about long-term memory. She had seen Sister Act. She loved Whoopi Goldberg. She loved Sister Act. She loved the singing. She loved the story. And I think it was just long-term memory where she could remember what was going on. When there was some movie, she was in the hospital, or some movie where I think it was The Parent Trap. And she just was bewildered because it wasn't part of her long-term memory.
Oh, that's something.
Yeah, it's a great question, by the way. I never.
Because I always wondered. I remember one time when my grandmother was in a facility. The rest of my family had gone out of the room, and I know with her situation, her old memories were fairly fresh. Her new memories, she wouldn't have been able to tell you what she had for breakfast if you offered her $1 million.
Yeah.
So at one point during World War II, she had worked in a box making factory. And I had never really heard it. So I asked her about it, and she's in the middle of telling me this wonderful story about working in the box factory when my aunt comes back in the room. And the first thing she says is, see how crazy she is. She never talks about anything about today. She's talking about some shit from way back when. And that's when my aunt nearly died that day, because I did not throttle her, but I said to her, if you ever open your mouth like that again in front of me, you're not going to want to know what's going to happen. I'm like, I asked her about that because I knew I could engage with her about that.
Right.
And that's the insidious thing about dementia is it can take away a memory, but maybe not the physical person, as well. What I mean by that is they're able to move around, they're able to do things, and yet they don't. The saddest thing is when they have no idea who their children are.
Right. I think that when I watched my mother try to figure out who I was or who my sister was, and there's a short moment in the book where, I'm asking her these questions, which, I think it was me just saying, I know you're in there, am I not willing to let go? At the end of the day, I began, all she needed to feel was safe and loved. And that was it. And if she didn't really know who I was, or if she thought I was a little girl, she once said, but you're a little girl. When I said, I'm going to do something, I'm going to take care of this. Oh, you're a little girl. It's like, does she feel safe? Does she feel loved? Is she enjoying something that I can bring to her, like food, or like, can we watch Singing in the Rain one more time? Which, by the way, it was playing across the street in a big theater with 35 millimeter. And I was like, no. It was the one movie I will never watch ever again. So, I think like that's where I kind of came to peace with, who I was losing and who I was gaining. At that point, it's not about me. It's how to make this feeling really grow around this person. Do they feel safe? Do they feel loved? And and I feel like I was successful with that. That was the one thing I walked out of. Like I did that.
I agree. That's what I got from your book. I really do. The one thing I will ask about, and this is, I hope it's not too heartfelt, but there is a quote that you put in when your mother passed away. You said, "I lied. I did not bring her home."
Yeah.
Did you forgive yourself for that?
I don't know how much regret I had around that. I do wish that it had been a different situation. There's in that book that, like as the year goes on, as the clean out goes on, I quote my Dutch friend who was a funeral director, which is don't chew. And so when I do slip back to that last night and feel that I could have done it better, I understand that there's not one person or very few people that I've ever spoken to about those last moments of someone's life where they felt they couldn't have done it better. All of us go back and go, yeah, I could have done that better. So it wasn't so much forgiving. It was just wishing I had done it better. And part about healing is to say, how can I do it better today? Like, what was that something that I could not do at that moment that I can do now? And so there's that, what we would call living amends. I do, again, she died loved. I mean, I keep coming back to she died loved. I was holding her hand. My sister was there. She was hearing our voices. She didn't die alone. She died loved. It is that, like, we talk about moments of where you're now a man, you're now a woman, you're now an adult. But at that moment, that really was like where I say, I made a decision as a woman. I came out of that emergency room completely stepping into a new role that had to be made. So it was a tough night. I think more about wishing I had punched the EMS.
I sort of wish you had too, but you'd probably be in jail instead of.
I know. I guess every once in a while I think about that. I really should have just punched that.
I just cannot get past the fact that when they show up, when EMS shows up and they see the situation, they have to assess the situation. That's what they're there for. I find it, you either get somebody who's really sympathetic and compassionate, or you get someone who has a badge and they need to prove themselves. And that's the one that I don't like to run into, because when I'm tired and angry and
Yeah.
sad, I'm going to probably say things that I might not ordinarily say to someone who has a badge. So I'm like, really, this doesn't work well for me.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I also go back to them and say, this EMS worker was not prepared or comfortable with the fact that I was documenting.
Yes, yes.
You know,
And that is something, and I will say I'm not an attorney, but I believe that EMS worker was 100% wrong. There's no HIPAA compliance with that. You can take all the photos you want. HIPAA,
well,
HIPAA,
yeah,
HIPAA covers you telling somebody else about somebody's business.
yeah,
HIPAA doesn't keep you from documenting
yeah.
what's going on. And they also, I know so many people are like, well, don't take a photo of me because I know you're going to try to use it against me. Why don't you ask me what I want to do? Why do I want to take this photo? That just be an easy conversation to have, but
No,
they chose a different route.
she was not comfortable with it. And I think also because I was uncomfortable with what they were doing, which was thinking we didn't have a living will. I thought we had, it was a complicated night. And at the end of it all, we had a great doctor who set up the Pandora box. The Pandora, was new, and the iPhone was new. That was he just put this new multi-$1,000 iPhone next to her ear, and we played her old music. And that's where I have to return to.
Yes, that's the blessing of the night.
Yeah, that was, when my father was dying, and he also had dementia, he was in a Californian home, board and care, and they were amazing. I walked in with a camera and I photographed from beginning to end those last few hours of his life. And they were incredibly respectful and supportive. And I appreciated that. And they are really powerful photos that I don't know what I'll do with, but I needed to do that for myself. I think the other thing, and this is something that I really want to hold such gratitude for Florence, was that art comes first, that her understanding about what expression is, when it's autobiographical or when it's memoir or when it's about her, that she absolutely understood the process of art. And that's a rare gift. Like, I was raised in a family where I was allowed, even through passive neglect, whatever, I was allowed to tell the story of our family. And so my first play, which was produced at the Wow Cafe, my first play was about my mother and my sister. And Florence came to see it several times. And I said, how do you feel about it? She goes, well, in the beginning, it was like feeling like my diary was being read out loud. But, the minute it becomes art, the minute it's on stage, it's something else. It belongs to the world and it's different. And that's the gift that I got by being raised as by an artist to be an artist. And I understand how rare that is for so many artists, that they're always going against this undertow of family, obligation, which brings me to the ex-lover, because the ex-lover could not conceive of her story being something greater than her shame.
That's so sad. That is just so sad. And what a gift Florence did give you, because, honestly, being able to tell the truth as we see it, because somebody said to me one time when my parents were divorcing, well, your mother has her truth, your father has his truth, and the real truth is somewhere in between. Yeah. It was a great gift for me. It's what I needed to hear at that moment, because I did realize that, you and I will talk about this recording at some point to someone. We may not remember it the exact same way, but we have a piece of art that will show the world what this moment was like forever.
Right. There's not two sides to every story. There are three. There's the tails, the heads, and then there's this middle side, because it's three-dimensional. And I think about that a lot, because there are stances that I've taken in family situations, in my relationship with my husband, in my relationship with my friends. There's two sides. No, there are three. There's something in the middle. And that middle is the place that I always try to write to, or write as or write of, because
That's right.
that middle is going to make the story something that's not about anything that I'm writing. It's not about like, woe is me or haha, those idiots. It's going to be about that wonderful, uncomfortable, funny as hell, wincing moment of, oh shit, yeah, that happens to all of us, which is why I watch a lot of stand-ups, because that's what they're doing. They're walking on that third moment. They're talking on that third moment. That's where things get exciting for me. And I've been asked about Her New York and the humor in it. And I have to say, that caught me by surprise. That I didn't expect. In all the conversations I've had about the book, I just was caught by surprise of people saying, how did you do the humor? It's like, I wasn't doing anything. I mean, maybe I got natural wit from both my parents. Thanks, folks.
Right.
But I do think when you walk that third moment,
Yes.
that third side, that's where the delight of being alive and not alone is fucking funny.
It is. And, you know, that's the experience that this reader, and I'm sure so many readers got, is because had you tried to be funny, it would have fallen flat.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work that way. I mean, we can write a joke, we can tell a story that's funny, we can intentionally be funny, but when you're doing a memoir or when you're talking about someone's life, the humor comes out if we let it come out naturally and organically. If we force it onto the page, then it's just fake. Then you're trying to get an emotion. That's something you did not do, CO. You gave us emotion, but you gave us purity, which was greatly appreciated.
So glad. Thank you. That's great feedback. And I'm so glad you like the book, and I appreciate you celebrating the book.
I do indeed.
I like
Again,
the book too.
the book is It Was Her New York, and now for every reader, it will be Our New York as well. So
Please.
Thank you so much, CO.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And do you have a website or social media you would like to share?
Yes, it's very easy. COMOED at .net.
Perfect.
COMOED.net. I'm also on Instagram. If you go to my website, you can get the Instagram link. It's a little bit different.
Fantastic.
Thank you
so much. This was such a wonderful time. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you. I had a blast.
Me too. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.